So maybe you've heard a lot these days about resilience. You can't enter a parenting conversation, an education conversation, or a business conversation without hearing the word pop up. And what's important is that we actually understand what resilience is and what it isn't. And a lot of times people think, ooh, I'm either born with it or I'm not, or it's about being the strongest person or the smartest person in the room or someone that never lets anybody see me sweat. But resilience isn't actually like that. And when we look at the science of resilience, we can learn a lot about how we can apply its principles in our everyday lives. So one way I think about this is picture a tree in a storm. When you see it bending, so think of a palm tree in a hurricane, and you see it bend and bend and bend, and you feel like it's gonna break. It's come to that point where the conditions around it are so intense, you can't imagine that tree is going to be okay. But what's amazing with the forces of nature is that tree many times comes back up again, and there's actually certain breeds of trees that when that happens to them, their root system actually gets stronger. And I feel like this is a great way for us to think about ourselves as human beings in an ecosystem that's really chaotic. There's always storms in our lives, right? And a lot of times when it's happening to us, we feel like it's out of control. We feel like we're gonna be done. This is gonna be the end of us. And what's amazing is that we as human beings are wired for resilience. We are wired to come back and return to homeostasis and to get to a place where we can continue to flourish. Resilience is a process. It's a process of positive adaptation in the face of adversity. So when you first hear about resilience, you might think bounce back, keep going, all those kinds of keywords. And resilience really is about that ability to go through hard times and then be able to recover, and not only recover, but learn from those experiences and recognize that many times when we go through hardships, it creates a deeper sense of empathy for us, appreciation for life, and it really grows us in ways that we might not have expected. It's not like any of us want storms to come, right? No one says bring it on, I want everything to be chaotic. But we oftentimes, after it's all said and done, realize that those storms really did strengthen our roots, just like the tree. The reason resilience has become popular is because we need it. We need to know what is it that we can put into play in our everyday life so that we're not, just flattened by the storms of life, and so that we're not feeling isolated or alone or depleted. And so there's a few things that you can think about to cultivate that sense of resilience for yourself. And remember that when you do that, it's also going to help you show up in a more authentic way, in a way where you're going to have increasing influence on those around you, which is really also very much a protective factor. So let's talk about protective factors. Protective factors basically mean we all have things in our lives that serve as a buffer or a protective factor in our lives that help us when things are coming at us, when things are overwhelming, we're oversaturated, we're overstimulated, we feel not enough, we feel like we have imposter syndrome, all that kind of stress marinade that's all around us that we soak up. It helps us to squeeze that out and to really rethink what's happening inside of ourselves and to see the bigger picture. So when we think about protective factors include things like relationships. And that's because they show us that we're not alone, that the kinds of feelings and the thoughts that we're experiencing are very common. What I feel and what I experience behind the scenes is going to be very likely what you feel as well. And it's really shared humanity. And another way to think about that is not just mental health condition, but human condition. We're all scared. We're all in this age of anxiety. We're all trying to make our way. We're trying to find our place. We're trying to find our voice. We're trying to figure hard things out. Another thing you can think about with relationships, and I love this kind of metaphor, relationships are like a mirror to us. How many of you have ever been to a fun house with all the mirrors, right? And you see the mirror that makes you look so tall or so wide or like your face is goofy, right? And those mirrors don't really give us an accurate depiction of ourselves. There's a distortion that happens. What we know is that we can all be mirrors to each other. And we want to be the kind of mirror that is very calibrated, that really shows that accurate picture. What we need to do is find people that can give us a much more humane and accurate illustration of our beauty, of our worth, of where our strengths are. And we want people that can reflect that back to us. And that doesn't mean, again, that they're never going to say, you know, I think you should work on this, or this is an area of development for you. But we really need that mirror to show us all those sides, because as we're with people and they reflect those things to us, it can be a very healing interaction, a very protective interaction that we all need in our lives. We don't, you know, how many of us maybe have broken mirrors? We have people that are just like, rah, you know, like always chirping at us and saying it's not enough, all while they're missing out on everything that is right and that is wonderful. And I think we have to really be cautious who we spend time with, because that kind of energy that they bring into our lives, if it's constant punitive and negative and pointing out the flaws and the mistakes and the issues, that's not going to necessarily influence us in a way that helps us to be resilient. It's actually going to start to penetrate. It's going to start to affect our sense of self-worth. It's going to quiet us down. It's going to make us feel like we have to play small, or that we should be stuck in shame. So we have to be careful who our mirrors are. We have to choose them wisely. And it might mean that then you have to venture out and try to find new relationships and new communities to participate in, mentors, people that you feel really embody a sense of resilience. Ask them, you know, what's tough for you? What's hard for you? How have you overcome it? Asking those kinds of questions can really boost our sense of resilience and help us to feel better connected, and to know that we can continue to restore and to grow in our lives. So remember, when we think about the example of the tree in the storm and how we are so much like that in our own adaptive and recovery process. When that storm happens, it's not like the tree just whoop, it's just fine again, right? There's a process of recovery. And I think what happens in society, we want to just slap rainbows and butterflies and happy smiley faces on everything really quickly. But when we go through trauma and trials and difficulties, and we're under a lot of stress, we need time to actually return to homeostasis. And what we say to ourselves as we're trying to buy that time is really important. So we need to practice self-compassion. We need to not beat ourselves up and get mad if we're not right back on track really quickly. We need to be patient. And that's part of resilience as well, is being patient, persevering, knowing that adaptation and recovery aren't just a quick fix, not like a 1, 2, 3 quick solution, but it takes time to do that. And we need to be gentle with ourselves, and we need, again, to find the right resources around us, whether that's through community or self-care, or just shifting our mindsets in a positive way to allow that time and space for full healing to happen. Another thing that happens with resilience, it gets very romanticized. We love stories of setbacks to comebacks. And who doesn't love that? I mean, there's extraordinary things that people recover from. We go through trauma, we're not one and done, and we can make it through it. But a lot of times those kinds of oversimplified, hyped stories don't tell the truth of the systemic issues we face in societies across the world. And what I mean by this is, a lot of times we just hear of these like anecdotal examples, but when we look at the research in resilience, for example, we know that it's important to take what's called a systems lens and to say, you know, we have disparities and stigma and discrimination based on race, class, gender, sexual orientation, age, ability, size, religion. These social identity categories in society really have been dominated historically and sort of set us up for these in and out groups. And a lot of times when we think about a person who may be in one of these marginalized or stigmatized or discriminated groups, we might say, look, well, this person was able to do it. But we also have to make sure that all of us are putting our attention and intention into fostering social change so that those conditions that create shame, that create stigma, that create hardships for people are reduced and mitigated, that we get rid of those, that we work to eradicate those kinds of disparities that cause us to need to be resilient in the first place. And that's really important because a lot of times we just think, oh, this person made it and therefore these issues in society aren't that bad, they get minimized. It's really important to understand that resilience happens, again, when we strengthen society, that when we get rid of these in and out groups, we stop with dominant culture dictating and pathologizing people and stigmatizing people. So that's a really important part of thinking about resilience and rethinking resilience. And if you think about yourself, let's say you are in a corporation, you're an organization, you want to pay attention to how those power dynamics play out, how that influences relationships, and how safe it is for people to show up as their true selves. Because we know that the more authentic we can be, the more we can be ourselves, the more we can embrace all the sides of ourselves and our narratives, the more likely we are to flourish. So if you're a leader, you're a parent, you're an educator, whatever realm you find yourself in where you have influence, you can help to make sure that all voices are represented, that they can freely contribute, and that they know that they matter. That's something that really helps to foster resilience within an organization. A lot of times when people think about resilience, they feel like, well, I'm not resilient. And sometimes even if you've been through trauma or difficulty, you might feel uncomfortable when someone calls you resilient because you don't feel like you are. You don't feel strong. You still feel completely withered by the storms that you've gone through. And this is really oftentimes common if someone has a complex PTSD situation, other forms of trauma, or just difficulties they've experienced where they've started to internalize just those feelings of, I'm broken, I'm damaged, I'm not really that strong, or just if within you feel overwhelmed, a lot of times you don't necessarily feel like you're resilient. So what we want to think about in terms of protective factors is that a resilient identity, to know that even if we don't necessarily feel strong, when we're going through hard things and still recovering from them, it doesn't mean that we're not strong. It's just that we haven't quite really come to that point of homeostasis or recovery, and therefore what's renting space in our heads is often just that sense of exhaustion, fatigue, overwhelm, despair, hopelessness. And what's really important is to remember that even if you don't feel resilient, the fact that you're showing up every day, that you're getting up, that you're trying to heal, that you're trying to access resources that will help you to find protective factors, those are what make you resilient. You know, your effort to continue to heal and restore, and your effort to see yourself in a more humane way, in a less judgmental way, really. So remember not to take the bait of that lie that I don't feel like I am, so I must not be. Because every human being, no matter what your circumstances, is wired for resilience. Just like the trees in nature, we as human beings by nature are very much capable of resilience. But again, it doesn't happen in isolation, it happens in community. It doesn't happen when we put undue pressure on ourselves, it happens when we practice self-compassion. It doesn't happen when we try to follow a 3-step formula. It happens when we allow ourselves time and we have patience.